That fence, Mr. Thompson, is an affront to the aesthetic harmony of this community, and it will be torn down by Friday, or I will personally hire a crew to tear it down and bill you for the privilege of your compliance." The voice, a syrupy blend of condescension and absolute authority, belonged to Karen, the president of the Oakwood Preserve Homeowners Association. She stood on the pristine sidewalk just beyond my newly established property line, her considerable frame clad in a powder blue tracksuit that strained at the seams, a clipboard clutched to her chest like a holy shield. Her face, a mask of righteous indignation, was framed by a helmet of blonde hair so rigidly lacquered it seemed capable of deflecting small arms fire. I stood on my own lawn, the scent of freshly turned earth and treated pine still hanging in the humid afternoon air, my hand resting on the top of the brand-new 6-foot privacy fence that had apparently caused the very fabric of her universe to unravel. I had spent the last 3 weekends, every spare hour I had, setting each post, leveling each panel, driving every screw with the kind of meticulous precision that had been drilled into me over 20 years in the Army Corps of Engineers. It wasn't just wood and nails, it was a sanctuary, a perimeter of safety for my daughter, Chloe, and her service dog, Gunner. But to Karen, it was a declaration of war. Her eyes, small and hard, scanned the length of the fence, a perfect line of dark-stained cedar running from the back corner of my house to the edge of the woods that bordered my property. "This is a violation of Article 4, Section 2B of the Covenants, Conditions and Restrictions," she announced, tapping a perfectly manicured nail on her clipboard. "All fences must be pre-approved by the Architectural Review Committee, of which I am the chair. Furthermore, no fence may exceed 4 feet in height, and it must be of a white picket design. Your monstrosity fails on all counts." I kept my expression neutral, a skill honed in environments far more hostile than a suburban cul-de-sac. I let the silence stretch, watching as her certainty began to curdle into impatience. "I'll be expecting a demolition plan on my desk by tomorrow morning," she added, her voice taking on a sharp, punitive edge. It was the sheer, unadulterated entitlement that got me, the casual assumption that her authority was absolute, her interpretation of the rules infallible, and my rights entirely negotiable. She saw a retired Army major, a new resident she could bully into submission, a quick and easy victory to consolidate her little fiefdom. What she didn't see, what she couldn't possibly know, was that she had just picked a fight with the one man in the entire county she should have left alone. She had just demanded that I, Mark Thompson, tear down my perfectly legal fence, without realizing that for the past 6 months my civilian job title was Senior County Building Inspector. If you've ever had a nightmare neighbor or an HOA from hell, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button right now and let me know in the comments where you're watching from or share your own HOA horror story. You are not going to want to miss how this story of bureaucratic audacity and meticulously planned revenge unfolds. Now, where were we? Ah, yes, the declaration of war over a cedar fence. My journey to this particular battlefield, this immaculately landscaped slice of suburban hell, began 9 months earlier, after 2 decades of service, of deployments to places where the color of the dirt was the only thing that didn't change. I had finally hung up my uniform for good. My pension was solid, and my final years in the service had been stateside, allowing me to transition into a second career with the county, leveraging my extensive experience with construction, logistics, and most importantly, regulations. I was a man who understood rules, who had lived and nearly died by them. The job as a building inspector felt like a natural fit. It was about ensuring safety, order, and compliance based on a clear, established code. There was no ambiguity, just the book. And I knew the book, cover to cover. My wife, Sarah, and I chose Oakwood Preserve for its supposed tranquility. The brochure promised a family-friendly community, good schools, and peaceful living. For me, it was about giving my daughter, Chloe, a stable, quiet place to grow up. Chloe was 10, a bright, sensitive kid who struggled with an anxiety disorder that had worsened after a particularly frightening incident a few years back. Her therapist had recommended a service animal, and that's how Gunner, a goofy, loving, and preternaturally calm golden retriever, came into our lives. He was more than a pet. He was Chloe's anchor, her furry shadow, the one thing that could pull her back from the edge of a panic attack. The one non-negotiable for our new home was a large, fenced-in yard where Gunner could run freely and Chloe could play with him without fear. The house we found in Oakwood Preserve was perfect, except for one thing: it had no fence. The backyard sloped gently down into a stretch of protected woodland. It was beautiful, but it wasn't secure. So before we even closed on the house, I did my due diligence. I obtained a copy of the HOA Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions, the CC and Res, a document thicker than a field manual. I read every single line, cross-referencing it with the county building codes I now enforce daily. What I found was interesting. Karen's beloved Article 4, Section 2B did indeed mention a 4-foot white picket fence. However, I also found Article 7, Section 5, a clause pertaining to properties that abutted designated county greenbelts or protected woodlands. This clause, likely overlooked for years, explicitly stated that for the safety and containment of domestic animals and to prevent encroachment on the preserve, properties adjacent to the woods were permitted to erect a solid privacy fence up to 6 feet in height, with materials subject to county code. It was a loophole, a beautiful, glorious loophole born from the competing interests of aesthetics and liability, and my property was one of only 5 in the entire development that qualified. The CC and Rs also stated that any construction compliant with county codes and not in direct violation of a superseding covenant did not require pre-approval, only a post-completion notification to the board for their records. The trap was already there in the fine print before I even bought the house. I followed every rule to the letter. I pulled the proper county permit for the fence, a process I was intimately familiar with. The permit application, which I personally reviewed and approved at the county office, a fact I kept to myself, clearly stated 6-foot solid cedar privacy fence. I paid the fee, posted the permit in my front window as required by law, and got to work. I used high-quality materials, sunk the posts in concrete 3 feet deep, and ensured every measurement was exact. It was a damn fine fence, if I did say so myself. It was strong, straight, and completely unimpeachably legal. And now Karen, in her powder blue tracksuit, was ordering me to tear it down. I looked from her furious face to my fence, a symbol of my family's new beginning, and felt a cold, familiar calm settle over me. The kind of calm you feel before a storm when you know exactly what's coming and you're the only one prepared for it. "With all due respect, ma'am," I said, my voice even and low, "I believe you'll find that fence is in full compliance with both the county code and the governing documents of this association." Her laugh was a short, sharp bark. "I am the governing document of this association, Mr. Thompson. I'll see you in violation. Fines will begin accruing tomorrow. $100 a day. Let's see how long your arrogance lasts when it starts costing you." She turned on her heel, the soles of her pristine white sneakers squeaking on the pavement, and marched back toward her house, which sat on a corner lot 3 doors down, a self-appointed queen returning to her castle. I watched her go, then looked back at my fence. She had fired the first shot, and now it was my turn to sight in my target. She thought this was a battle of wills. She had no idea it was about to become a battle of paperwork, and in that arena, I was undefeated. This was no longer about a fence, it was about principle. The next morning, exactly as promised, the first shot in Karen's paper-based assault arrived. It was a crisp, cream-colored envelope personally delivered and wedged into the handle of my front door. Inside, on thick letterhead embossed with the Oakwood Preserve HOA logo, was an official notice of violation. It cited the infamous Article 4, Section 2B, and detailed my transgression: the construction of a non-conforming boundary structure. At the bottom, in an aggressive, bold font, was the penalty: a fine of $100 with a warning that the same fine would be levied every 24 hours until the violation was cured, or which in her language meant demolished. The letter was signed with a flourish by Karen, president and chair of the Architectural Review Committee. It was designed to intimidate, to create a sense of overwhelming bureaucratic power that would crush a homeowner into submission. I read it over a cup of black coffee, a small smile playing on my lips. This was her opening salvo, and it was sloppy, predictable. I took the notice and placed it in a new folder, which I labeled with a black marker, HOA Correspondence, Project Retribution. My military training emphasized the importance of documentation, of creating a meticulous paper trail that could be used to reconstruct events, justify actions, and if necessary, bury an opponent. I was about to create a file on Karen and the Oakwood Preserve HOA that would make a Senate investigation look like a book report. My first countermove was simple and professional. I drafted a formal response on my own letterhead. It was polite, dispassionate, and utterly devastating in its precision. I began by acknowledging receipt of her notice. Then, I methodically dismantled her entire argument. "Dear Ms. President," I wrote, "thank you for your correspondence dated date regarding the fence at my property, 121 Oakwood Lane. While I appreciate the committee's dedication to maintaining community standards, I must respectfully point out an error in your assessment." I then quoted Article 4, Section 2B, just as she had. Immediately following, I wrote, "However, I must draw your attention to the superseding clause found in Article 7, Section 5 of the CC&Rs, which pertains to properties, such as mine, that directly abut the county-designated greenbelt." I transcribed the entire section verbatim, highlighting the key phrases, "up to 6 feet in height and solid privacy fence." I continued, "Furthermore, as stipulated in the bylaws, since the structure is in full compliance with the specific covenant and all relevant county ordinances, it requires only a post-completion notification for the board's records, not pre-approval. Please consider this letter that notification." As a final tactical flourish, I attached 2 documents. The first was a copy of the relevant page from the CC&RS with Article 7, Section 5, circled in red ink. The second was a copy of my officially approved and stamped county building permit number 734-B1, which clearly described the fence in detail. I concluded the letter with a simple, firm statement. As the fence is in full compliance with all governing documents and local laws, no violation exists. Therefore, no fines are applicable, and I consider this matter closed. I will not be submitting a demolition plan as the structure is permanent and legal. I made 3 copies of the entire packet, one for my file, one to be sent via certified mail to the HOA's official address, requiring a signature upon receipt, and one that I hand-delivered myself. I walked down the street to Karen's house later that afternoon. Her car, a massive white SUV that took up the entire driveway, was parked at a slight angle, encroaching on the public sidewalk by a good 6 inches. A clear violation of both city ordinance and, I was willing to bet, an HOA bylaw. I made a mental note and took a quick, discreet photo with my phone. I rang the doorbell. After a moment, Karen answered, wearing a silk caftan that billowed around her. Her expression soured the moment she saw me. "What do you want?" she snapped. "I'm delivering my official response to your notice," I said calmly, holding out the envelope. She snatched it from my hand. "This doesn't change anything. The committee has made its decision." "The committee might want to read the CC&Rs again," I replied, my voice level. "Specifically Article 7. I've included a copy for your convenience, along with the county permit. Have a good evening, ma'am." I turned and walked away without waiting for a response, feeling her furious gaze burning into my back. The certified letter would create an undeniable legal record that she had received my rebuttal. The hand delivery was a psychological move, a demonstration that I was not intimidated and would not be communicating only through the mail. The next day, another cream-colored envelope appeared. It contained a second notice of violation, this time with the fine amount updated to $200. It stated that my appeal had been reviewed by the committee, a committee I knew consisted of her and 2 of her closest sycophants, and was denied. The letter was curt, dismissive, and utterly devoid of any legal reasoning. It simply restated her original demand. She was ignoring the evidence. She was doubling down, assuming that the sheer force of her position would eventually wear me down. This was a critical error on her part. She was escalating a dispute from a simple disagreement over rules to a direct refusal to acknowledge the governing documents she was sworn to uphold. This was no longer just bureaucratic incompetence. It was a willful abuse of power. I photographed the second notice, filed it away next to the first, and began the next phase of my plan. The fines were symbolic. They had no real legal weight as long as the violation itself was invalid. But her refusal to engage with the facts was the key. I now had a documented instance of the HOA board, led by its president, failing to abide by its own covenants. It was a small crack in her armor, but I knew that with enough pressure, small cracks could shatter the entire facade. The battle was moving from the lawn to the ledger, and I was just getting started. I knew she wouldn't stop. People like Karen never do. Their power is derived from the perception of being untouchable, and any challenge, no matter how well reasoned, is seen as an existential threat. Her next move would be to try and make the financial threat real, and I was ready for it. My file was getting thicker, and my strategy was becoming clearer. She was building my case for me one violation notice at a time. The fines, as I predicted, became a daily ritual. Each morning, another cream-colored envelope would be waiting, a little paper soldier in Karen's escalating war of attrition. The total climbed with grim predictability. $300, $400, $500. Each notice was a carbon copy of the last, the only change being the ascending number at the bottom, a testament to her stubborn refusal to acknowledge reality. I dutifully photographed each one, time-stamped it, and placed it in the Project Retribution folder, which was now beginning to resemble a legal brief. I never responded to them directly again. My initial certified letter was my one and only legal statement on the matter. Acknowledging the fines further would give them a legitimacy they didn't deserve. Instead, I shifted my focus to a new front. Offense. Karen believed she was applying financial pressure. She was about to find out what real pressure felt like. Her next move was an attempt to formalize the threat. About 2 weeks into the siege, after the debt had crossed the $1,500 mark, a new letter arrived. This one was from the HOA's legal counsel, a small local firm that likely handled boilerplate collection work. The letter was more menacing in tone, referencing the possibility of placing a lien on my property for the unpaid fines. A lien would cloud the title to my home, making it impossible to sell or refinance until the debt was settled. This was her ace in the hole, the ultimate weapon in the HOA arsenal. It was also the move I had been waiting for. A lien for an illegitimate fine is legally unenforceable, but fighting it can be expensive and time-consuming for the average homeowner. It was a bluff designed to provoke panic and capitulation. I, however, was not the average homeowner. I read the lawyer's letter, noting the name of the firm and the attorney who signed it. Then I began my own paperwork offensive. My first step was to formalize my own records. I created a detailed log in a spreadsheet. Each entry had a date, a description of the event, a reference to the corresponding document in my folder, and any photographic evidence. Day 1, verbal threat from K. Miller, HOA president. Day 2, received violation notice number 1. Day 2, delivered certified rebuttal letter. Day 3, received violation notice number 2, denial of appeal. Day 4, received fine notice, $300. It was meticulous, dry, and irrefutable. My second step was to turn the weapon of paperwork back on its wielder. HOAs, for all their posturing, are corporations. They are bound by state laws governing nonprofits and corporate entities. This includes statutes regarding open records. I drafted a formal records request citing the relevant state corporation code. I requested copies of the HOA's financials for the past 3 years, including detailed budget reports, records of all expenditures over $500, and a ledger of all fines levied and collected. I also requested the minutes from all board meetings and architectural review committee meetings for the same period. This was not a request she could deny through a simple committee vote. This was a legal demand, and failure to comply within the statutorily required 30 days would open the HOA up to legal action and potential sanctions from the State Attorney General's office. I sent this request, like my first letter, via certified mail to the HOA's lawyer, copying the official HOA address. This ensured that her legal counsel was aware that I knew my rights and was prepared to enforce them. While I waited for that 30-day clock to tick down, I started Phase 3, surveillance and documentation of Karen's own kingdom. I began taking walks around the neighborhood in the early morning and late evening, my phone always ready. As I suspected, Karen's property was a treasure trove of hypocrisy. Her massive white SUV was a permanent fixture on the sidewalk, photos taken. She had installed a new, elaborate gas-powered fire pit on her back patio, a large, permanent structure. A quick search of the county permit database, my database, showed no permit had ever been pulled for the gas line installation. A serious code violation and a potential fire hazard, photos taken along with a screenshot of the empty permit search. The most glaring violation, however, was her deck. Years ago, she had apparently enclosed a portion of her second-story deck to create what she called a sunroom. It was a shoddily constructed addition with mismatched windows and siding that bulged in places. It was painfully obvious that it was not part of the original home design. Another search of the county's historical permit records confirmed my suspicion. No permit, no plans submitted, no inspections ever performed on the structural alterations. It was an illegal, uninspected addition to her home. This was the nuclear option. An unpermitted structural modification wasn't just an HOA issue. It was a serious county-level violation. It rendered her home technically unsellable, and depending on the severity of the structural deficiencies, potentially unsafe. I took dozens of high-resolution photos from the street and from the edge of the woods behind her property line, capturing the poor construction, the sagging roof line, the way the addition was separating from the main structure. I logged every photo, every search result, every potential violation into my spreadsheet. My folder grew heavier. It was no longer just a defensive file, it was an indictment. Karen thought she was burying me in paper, but every notice she sent, every threat she made only added another page to the case I was building against her. The lien was her attempt to put a financial gun to my head. She had no idea I was quietly assembling a legal cannon aimed directly at the foundations of her little empire, and the fuse was already lit. The 30-day deadline for the financial records was ticking, and I knew with the certainty of a man who understands the arrogance of petty tyrants that she would either ignore it or send an incomplete doctored response. Either way, she would be breaking the law, and I would be there to document it. The daily ritual of collecting Karen's vanity fines continued, the stack of cream-colored envelopes in my file growing into a monument of her obstinance. The supposed debt climbed past $2,000, then $3,000. It was a meaningless monopoly money figure, but I knew it fed her sense of control. While she was busy with her performative bookkeeping, I was engaged in the far more satisfying work of reconnaissance. My investigation expanded beyond just Karen's property. I started talking to my neighbors, not directly about my fight at first, but just making conversation while walking gunner or while bringing in the trash cans. I learned to listen. And what I heard was a quiet chorus of resentment. A neighborhood held hostage by years of Karen's selective and vindictive enforcement. My first real breakthrough came with Mrs. Gable, an elderly widow who lived 2 doors down. She spent most of her days tending to a magnificent garden that was her pride and joy. I saw her one afternoon looking forlornly at a small patch of bare earth near her mailbox. I stopped and asked if everything was all right. Her eyes welled up. "It's my gnomes," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Karen made me remove them, said they were tacky lawn ornaments in violation of the landscaping code." She explained that she had received a flurry of fines, just like me. until she finally gave in and put her cherished collection of cheerful bearded figurines in the garage. My husband, he gave me the first one, before he passed. The story was heartbreaking in its pettiness. I asked her if she still had the violation notices. She did. She had saved every single one. That evening, she brought over a shoebox filled with them, a sad archive of bureaucratic bullying. I scanned them all into my digital file, adding a new tab to my spreadsheet. Collateral victims. The next day, I made a point of walking past the Sanchez family's house as Mr. Sanchez was outside packing up his kids' bicycles. I complimented him on his home's color, a pleasant sage green. He let out a bitter laugh. "Glad you like it. It's our third attempt." He went on to explain how the Architectural Review Committee, Karen, had rejected their first two color choices after they had already paid the painters, forcing them to repaint the entire house twice. The reason for the rejection? The shades were not on the pre-approved palette, yet, as Mr. Sanchez pointed out, Karen's own home was painted a custom shade of buttery yellow that was nowhere to be found on the same palette. "But who's going to challenge her?" he said with a shrug of resignation. "It's not worth the fight." I assured him I understood his frustration, and later that day I took a high-resolution photo of Karen's house, then a photo of the approved color palette from the HOA website. The discrepancy was obvious. I added the Sanchez's story and the photographic evidence to my growing file. My most important alliance, however, was forged with a man named Dave, who lived across the street. I had noticed the bracket for a flagpole on the front of his garage, but no flag. I saw him checking his mail one day and struck up a conversation. He had a Veterans of Foreign Wars sticker on his car bumper, so I opened with that. We quickly discovered we were both Army, though from different eras. After a few minutes of swapping stories, I casually mentioned the empty flagpole bracket. A thundercloud passed over his face. "Yeah, Karen," he said, the name leaving a foul taste. "Fined me for flying the stars and stripes. Said the pole wasn't an approved model and that the flag could only be flown on federal holidays." The sheer audacity of it was stunning. He had fought her for a while, but like the others, the constant stream of fines and threatening letters had worn him down. "She threatened to lien," he said, echoing the threat against me. My wife was worried. It was easier to just take it down. I told him about my fence, about the fines, about the lien threat. I saw a spark ignite in his eyes, a flicker of the old soldier's indignation. "She's citing a rule that doesn't apply to your lot?" he asked, his voice sharp with interest. I nodded. "And she's refusing to acknowledge the actual governing covenant or the county permit." I didn't tell him about my job, not yet. That was an ace I was keeping up my sleeve. But I did show him a copy of my response letter to Karen with the relevant sections of the CC and RS highlighted. He read it slowly, a grim smile spreading across his face. "This is airtight," he said, handing it back. "She's not just wrong. She's knowingly enforcing a rule she has to know is invalid. That's malfeasance." That evening, Dave came over. We sat at my dining room table, the project retribution folder open between us. I walked him through my spreadsheet, the photos, the letters from Mrs. Gable. He listened intently, his expression growing harder with each new piece of evidence. He told me about other neighbors, other stories of harassment over basketball hoops, vegetable gardens, and holiday decorations. It became clear that Karen wasn't just a stickler for rules. She was a predator who derived power from the humiliation and control of others. She targeted those she perceived as weak or unwilling to fight back. The elderly, young families, people who just wanted to live in peace. "She's been running this HOA like her own personal mafia for almost a decade," Dave said, shaking his head. "The board meetings are a joke. It's just her and her two cronies, Betty and Carol, voting on everything unanimously. Anyone who speaks up gets shouted down or becomes her next target." We made a pact that night. We would work together. Dave's role would be to discreetly reach out to the other victimized neighbors, to gauge their willingness to stand up if they had support. My role was to continue building the legal and documentary case. The 30-day deadline for the financial records was approaching. I had a feeling that was when the real fireworks would begin. The community alliance was forming, a quiet rebellion brewing beneath the surface of the perfectly manicured lawns. Karen thought she was isolating me, but with every unjust fine and every act of petty tyranny, she was inadvertently forging the very coalition that would bring her down. She was surrounded by enemies of her own making, and she was completely oblivious. The 30-day deadline for my records request came and went with a deafening silence. No package arrived from the HOA's lawyer, no email, no phone call, nothing. This was exactly the outcome I had hoped for. Her failure to comply with a formal, legally mandated request under the state's corporation code was a far more serious offense than a squabble over fence aesthetics. It was a clear violation of state law, and it gave me the leverage I needed to escalate the conflict beyond the confines of the HOA's kangaroo court. I waited exactly one additional business day, just to be generous. Then I drafted my next letter. This one wasn't addressed to Karen or the HOA. It was addressed to the Office of the State Attorney General, Division of Consumer Protection, with a carbon copy sent to the HOA's legal counsel to ensure they knew what was coming. The letter was a masterpiece of dispassionate, factual reporting. I outlined the timeline of events beginning with my initial records request. I cited the specific state statute that had been violated and the date the response was due. I attached a copy of the certified mail receipt showing that the HOA's lawyer had indeed received the request. I made no mention of the fence, the fines, or Karen's personal vendettas. This was a purely procedural complaint about a nonprofit corporation failing to meet its legal transparency obligations. I was framing the issue in the language of government bureaucracy, a language I knew the Attorney General's office would understand and act upon. Filing the complaint was like launching a guided missile. I wouldn't know the exact impact for weeks or even months, but I knew it was flying true and would strike its target. Meanwhile, Karen was about to hand me the opportunity to deploy my tactical nuclear weapon. A week after I filed the complaint with the AG, another letter arrived. This one, however, was not from the HOA. It was from the county. It was a formal citizen complaint notification from the Department of Planning and Development, my own department. The complaint, filed by one K. Miller, alleged the construction of an illegal, unpermitted structure at my address. She had gone over my head. Believing her authority within the HOA was absolute, she assumed the county would be her muscle. She had officially invited my employer to our little war. I had to suppress a laugh. She had just voluntarily placed her head in the lion's mouth. The process for a citizen complaint was standard. A county inspector would be assigned to visit the property, assess the situation, and determine if a violation of county code existed. It was a beautiful, karmic trap, and I was in the unique position of helping to spring it. The next morning at the office, I walked into my boss's office, a man named Frank, a gruff but fair man who had been a county lifer. "Frank," I said, closing the door behind me, "I need to recuse myself from a case. It's a citizen complaint against my own property." Frank raised an eyebrow. "Your property? Don't tell me you built something without a permit, Mark. I'd never hear the end of it." "Worse," I said, a grin finally breaking through my stoic facade. "I built it with a permit. My HOA president is on a bit of a power trip." I explained the whole situation, the fence, the CC and Rs, Karen's harassment, and now her complaint to the county. I showed him a copy of my permit and the relevant section of the HOA bylaws. He chuckled, shaking his head. "So she's calling the cops, not realizing you're the sheriff. This is rich. Okay, you're recused. I'll assign it to Henderson. He's by the book. He'll go out, see the permit, see the fence, and close the case. It's a waste of his time, but we have to follow procedure." "Actually, I said, leaning forward. I was hoping for a different approach. The complainant, a Ms. Karen Miller, at 101 Cornerstone Court, has made a formal allegation of a code violation. Standard procedure dictates we investigate the complaint. But the code also gives us the authority to investigate the complainant's property for retaliatory or bad faith filings, especially if we have reason to believe they may be in violation themselves." Frank's eyes lit up with understanding. "You have reason to believe?" "I have more than reason," I said, pulling out my phone. I showed him the photos. The SUV blocking the sidewalk, the unpermitted gas line to the fire pit, and the pièce de résistance, the sagging illegal sunroom edition. I swiped to the screenshot of the empty permit search for her address. Frank whistled softly. "Oh, she's a busy beaver, isn't she? That addition is a serious liability. The whole thing could peel off in a high wind." "My thoughts exactly," I said. "Henderson's inspection of my property will take 5 minutes. He'll see the permit, check the fence's setback and height, and sign off. I'd like to request that after he closes my case, he be reassigned to open a new one. A full structural and safety inspection of 101 Cornerstone Court, based on anonymous photographic evidence my office has received suggesting multiple significant code violations, including an unpermitted structural addition." It was the perfect legal trap. Karen had initiated the process. She had called the county for help. We were legally obligated to respond. And once we were involved, we had the authority to look wherever we saw a potential violation. Her complaint against me gave me the perfect, unimpeachable pretext to officially investigate her. Frank grinned, a wide, predatory grin. "Mark, sometimes I think you enjoyed the strategic parts of your old job a little too much. Write up the official request. I'll sign off on it myself. Henderson will be at your place tomorrow morning and at hers tomorrow afternoon." I walked out of his office feeling a profound sense of satisfaction. Karen had wanted to use the system to crush me. She didn't understand that I was the system. She thought she was playing checkers, moving her one king around the board with impunity. She was about to discover I was playing three-dimensional chess, and she was already in checkmate. The inspector was on his way, and the full weight of the county codebook was about to come crashing down on her illegally constructed sunroom. The reversal was in motion. The next morning, a white county truck with the official seal on the door pulled up in front of my house precisely at 9 a.m. A lanky inspector named Henderson, a guy I knew from the office, got out, clipboard in hand. He was all business, which was perfect. I greeted him at the door and walked him to the backyard. "Morning, Mark," he said, avoiding eye contact as per protocol for a recused case. "Here to follow up on a complaint regarding this fence." "Understood, Dees," I said, handing him my copy of the permit. He spent the next 10 minutes conducting a textbook inspection. He took out a tape measure and verified the height, exactly 6 feet. He checked the distance from the property line, perfect. He noted the quality of the construction, the depth of the posts, the materials used. He looked at the permit, looked at the fence, and made a few notes on his clipboard. "Well," he said, finally looking at me with a hint of a smile, "it appears you've built a fence, and it appears you did it according to the permit you were issued. I see no violations of county code here." He made a final signature on his form. "This case is closed. No violation found." "I appreciate you taking the time, Henderson," I said. "No problem," he replied, his eyes twinkling. "Now I've got another inspection on my list for this afternoon, 101 Cornerstone Court, something about an anonymous tip regarding an unpermitted addition." He gave me a slow, deliberate wink, got back in his truck, and drove off. The first trap had been sprung and disarmed. Now it was time for the second, far more devastating one. I spent the rest of the day with a sense of quiet, humming anticipation. I could only imagine the scene. Henderson, with his by-the-book demeanor, knocking on Karen's door. Her smug satisfaction at seeing the county truck, assuming he was there to give her a favorable report about my fence. The slow, delicious dawning of horror on her face as he explained that, no, he was actually there to inspect her property. Around 4:30 p.m., my phone rang. It was Dave. "You are not going to believe this, ha," he said, his voice a mix of awe and laughter. "There's a county inspector at Karen's place. He's been there for over 2 hours, and about 20 minutes ago he put a big red sticker on her front door. A red tag, the scarlet letter of the building world. It was a stop work order, or in this case more likely a notice of violation and an order to abate. It meant a serious, potentially dangerous violation had been identified." "What kind of sticker?" I asked, wanting the details. "It's big. Says, 'Unsafe to occupy,' in huge letters across the top. He put it right on the front door and another one on the door to her deck. Mark, what did you do?" I just pointed the system in the right direction, I said calmly. She called them, Dave. I just made sure they did a thorough job. The news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. People were walking past Karen's house, slowing their cars to get a look at the bright red notices plastered on her property. The symbol of her authority, her perfectly maintained fortress, was now publicly branded as unsafe and illegal. The psychological impact was immense. This wasn't an HOA letter you could toss in a drawer. This was a public shaming, delivered by an authority far greater than hers. Meanwhile, my 30 days to respond to the lawyer's lien threat were almost up. I had been holding my response, waiting for the perfect moment. This was it. I finalized my letter to the HOA's attorney. It was short, brutal, and professional. Dear Mr. Smith, it began, I am in receipt of your letter dated date, threatening a lien against my property for allegedly unpaid fines. As you know from my certified correspondence dated date, the fines are invalid as no violation of the CC and RS exists. My fence is in full compliance with Article 7, Section 5 and the associated county building permit, a copy of which you have. Then came the counterpunch. Furthermore, it has come to my attention that your client, the Oakwood Preserve HOA, acting through its president, Ms. Karen Miller, has failed to comply with my formal records request dated date in violation of State Corporation Code statute number. A formal complaint regarding this matter has been filed with the State Attorney General's office, and you can expect to hear from them shortly. Finally, the checkmate move. Given that the HOA is now operating in violation of state law, and its president is leveraging her position to file bad faith complaints while her own property is in significant violation of county safety codes, see County Case File Number C-8451 regarding 101 Cornerstone Court. Any attempt to place a lien on my property will be met with a countersuit against the HOA for damages, legal fees, and against Ms. Miller personally for breach of fiduciary duty and malicious harassment. I trust you will advise your client to cease all collection activities and retract the invalid fines immediately. I consider this matter and my fence permanently settled. I sent the letter via email, and for good measure via courier to the lawyer's office. There would be no question it was received. The trap was now fully sprung. I had neutralized the fines, preempted the lien with the threat of a larger and more damaging lawsuit, brought the state AG's office into play over the financial records, and used her own complaint to get her house red-tagged by the county. Dave's work on the ground had also paid off. He had a list of 12 families, including the Gables and the Sanchez's, who were now furious and ready to act. The upcoming annual HOA meeting, scheduled in 2 weeks, was no longer going to be Karen's usual coronation. It was going to be a tribunal, and I was coming prepared with a projector. The 2 weeks leading up to the annual HOA meeting were a study in contrasts. On the surface, the neighborhood was quiet, the manicured lawns and uniform mailboxes projecting an air of suburban tranquility, but underneath, a revolution was brewing. Dave and I had formed a small clandestine committee of our own. We met in my garage after dark, the door down, surrounded by the scent of sawdust and righteous indignation. Our group included Mrs. Gable, emboldened by the prospect of justice for her gnomes, Mr. Sanchez, armed with paint chips and receipts from his forced repainting fiasco, and 4 other families with their own stories of Karen's petty tyranny. My role was to assemble the evidence into a clear, undeniable presentation. I had purchased a portable projector and a screen. My dining room table was command central, covered in documents, timelines, and printouts of county codes and HOA bylaws. I was preparing for the meeting like a lawyer preparing for a trial. The centerpiece of my presentation was a slideshow. It was over 50 slides long, each one a nail in the coffin of Karen's reign. I started with my own fence, showing the relevant text from Article 7 side by side with a photo of my property line abutting the woods. I followed it with a high-resolution image of my county-approved permit. Simple, factual, undeniable. Next, I moved to the pattern of abuse. A slide for Mrs. Gable with a photo of her sad, gnomeless garden next to a copy of Karen's violation notice. I had found a clause in the bylaws that allowed for reasonable and personal decorative items, a clause Karen had conveniently ignored. a slide for the Sanchez family showing the approved HOA color palette next to a photo of Karen's non-compliant buttery yellow house. Slide after slide, I laid out the evidence of her hypocrisy and selective enforcement. The most damning section of the presentation was titled Fiscal and Legal Mismanagement. Here I detailed the HOA's failure to comply with my records request, showing a copy of the certified mail receipt and the state statute they had violated. I included a slide that simply said, "A formal complaint has been filed with the state attorney general." Then I moved to Karen's own property. I put up a photo of her illegally parked SUV with the text of the city ordinance it violated. I showed a picture of her unpermitted fire pit, next to the county code requiring permits for all gas line installations, and then the grand finale, a series of crystal clear photos of her illegal sunroom. I juxtaposed these with a screenshot of the empty permit search from the county website. I concluded with a full-screen image of the bright red "Unsafe to Occupy" notice that Henderson had slapped on her door, with the official county case number displayed prominently beneath it. Meanwhile, Karen was becoming increasingly unhinged. The red tags on her home were a constant public humiliation. I learned from Dave that she had received an official order to comply from the county, giving her 30 days to hire a licensed structural engineer to assess the illegal addition and provide a plan to either bring it up to code, an astronomically expensive proposition, or demolish it entirely. Her response was not compliance, but rage. She was seen tearing the red tags off her door, only for the county to return the next day and replace them, this time with an added warning of fines for tampering with an official notice. She had tried to call Frank, my boss, to complain about Henderson, and was coldly informed that the inspection was valid and the findings were severe. The HOA's lawyer, having received my cease and desist letter, had clearly advised her to back off. The daily fines for my fence stopped abruptly. The lien threat evaporated, but she wasn't surrendering. She was regrouping. Her strategy, it seemed, was to use the annual meeting as a platform to denounce me, to paint me as a troublemaker who was attacking the community and her personally. She sent out an email blast to all residents with a revised agenda for the meeting. A new item had been added: discussion and vote on sanctions against a homeowner in willful and continuous violation of covenants. That was me. She was going to put my crimes to a public vote. It was a bold, desperate move, and it was exactly what I wanted. She was setting the stage for her own public execution. The night of the meeting arrived. The community clubhouse, usually half empty for these events, was packed. Word had spread. The scent of conflict was in the air. Over 100 people crammed into a room designed for 50. Dave and our allies had disseminated a simple, discreet email. "If you're tired of how things are being run, show up. You'll want to see this." Karen, flanked by her 2 loyal board members, Betty and Carol, sat at a long table at the front of the room. She looked haggard, the strain showing around her eyes, but her expression was one of defiant fury. She banged a gavel to start the meeting, her voice tight with anger. They rushed through the old business. The treasurer's report, a masterpiece of vague generalities. Then Karen arrived at her new agenda item. "We will now discuss the ongoing and egregious violation by the resident at 121 Oakwood Lane," she announced, glaring directly at me. "This resident has erected an illegal structure in defiance of the board and has shown contempt for the rules that bind us all together as a community." This was my cue. I stood up calmly. "Madam President," I said, my voice carrying easily through the silent room, "before the board proceeds with any sanctions, I believe it is my right as a homeowner to address the community regarding this issue, and I have prepared a short presentation." Before she could object, Dave and Mr. Sanchez were already at the front of the room setting up the projector and screen I had brought. A murmur went through the crowd. Karen's face went from angry to confused to panicked as she saw the professional setup. "This is not on the agenda," she sputtered. "An open discussion is on the agenda," I countered smoothly. "And I am opening the discussion. If you have nothing to hide, you should have no problem with a little clarity." The room was buzzing. People were on my side before I'd even said a word. The screen flickered to life, and the first slide appeared, the title page, simple and direct. Oakwood Preserve, HOA, a review of covenant enforcement and board governance. I picked up the remote, looked out at the sea of faces, took a deep breath, and began. "Good evening, everyone." My voice was calm and measured, cutting through the tense atmosphere in the clubhouse. All eyes were on me. Karen, Betty, and Carol were frozen at the front table, their faces a mixture of fury and shock. My name is Mark Thompson. My family and I moved to 121 Oakwood Lane 9 months ago because we, like all of you, wanted to be part of a peaceful and well-managed community. Unfortunately, my experience has been anything but peaceful. I clicked the remote. The first slide showed a beautiful picture of my new fence, followed by a slide with the text of Article 4, the rule Karen had been using to persecute me. This is the rule I was told I violated. Click. The next slide showed the text of Article 7, the Greenbelt exception. And this is the rule from the same document that actually applies to my property. It's not ambiguous. It's not hidden. It's right there in the CC and Rs the board is sworn to uphold. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I saw people leaning over, whispering to their neighbors. When I pointed this out to our HOA president, I continued, my eyes locking on Karen. My evidence was ignored. The response was not a correction, but an escalation. Click. A slide appeared showing a collage of the dozen-plus violation notices she had sent me, the fines climbing into the thousands. This is not due process. This is harassment. I then moved through the stories of my neighbors. Click. A picture of Mrs. Gable's gnomeless garden. Mrs. Gable was fined and forced to remove garden decorations that her late husband gave her, despite a bylaw allowing for reasonable personal items. I ask you, are garden gnomes unreasonable? Mrs. Gable, sitting in the front row, looked vindicated. Click. The slide showing Karen's non-compliant house color next to the approved palette. The Sanchez family was forced to pay to have their house painted 3 times to comply with a color palette that the HOA president herself does not follow. Mr. Sanchez stood up briefly and nodded to the crowd, who responded with another wave of murmurs. Click. The empty flagpole bracket on Dave's garage. Dave, a combat veteran, was fined for flying the American flag on a non-holiday. This is not only shameful, it's a violation of the Federal Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005, which supersedes any and all HOA regulations. The room was turning. The quiet resentment that had simmered for years was now boiling over into open anger, directed squarely at the front table. Karen's face was a blotchy purple mask. "This is an outrage!" she shouted, banging her gavel. "This is a personal attack." "This is evidence, Karen," I replied coolly, using her first name for the first time. The disrespect was intentional, a stripping away of her title. And I'm just getting to the best part. Click. The slide titled Fiscal and Legal Mismanagement appeared. When I realized the board was unwilling to follow its own rules, I submitted a legal request for financial records and board minutes, as is my right under state law. Click. The image of the certified mail receipt appeared. The board, under Karen's leadership, broke the law by failing to respond. The gasp in the room was audible. This was no longer about taste or interpretation. This was about the law. As a result, I said, letting the words hang in the air, a formal complaint has been filed with the State Attorney General's office, which is now investigating the financial activities of this HOA. Now the room erupted. People were on their feet, shouting questions at Karen. "Where is our money going? What are you hiding?" She just sat there speechless, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. I held up a hand for silence. "Please, I'm not finished. It gets worse." The room quieted, a hungry anticipation in the air. "The HOA president used your money to have the HOA's lawyer threaten me with a property lien, and she filed a complaint against me with the county. She tried to use outside authorities to bully me into submission. But here's the thing about inviting the authorities to a party. Click. A photo of Karen's illegally parked SUV filled the screen. Click. A photo of her unpermitted gas fire pit. These are minor, but they show a pattern of disregard for the rules she so brutally enforces on the rest of us. And then, I said, my voice dropping for dramatic effect, there is this. Click. A crystal-clear, high-resolution photo of her sagging, shoddily built sunroom addition filled the screen. This is an unpermitted, uninspected, and illegal structural addition to her home. Click. The screenshot of the empty permit search. She never got a permit. She never had it inspected. She, the person in charge of enforcing architectural standards for all of us, has been living in a house with a dangerous and illegal modification for years. The final slide was the money shot. I clicked the remote, and the image of the huge red "unsafe to occupy" tag on her front door filled the screen. A collective gasp, followed by stunned silence, then an explosion of noise. The room descended into chaos. People were yelling, pointing, demanding her resignation. Karen, Betty, and Carol were huddled together, their faces pale with terror. Karen finally found her voice, a high-pitched shriek of pure rage. "Lies! This is all lies! He's a troublemaker! He's trying to destroy our community!" "The only thing I'm trying to destroy is your hypocrisy," I said, my voice cutting through the din. I turned to the audience. This isn't a community. It's been a dictatorship. You know it. You've lived it. The question is, what are you going to do about it? The bylaws allow for the removal of a board member with a 2/3 vote of a quorum of homeowners. We have a quorum right here, right now. Dave stood up. I moved a vote on the immediate removal of Karen Miller, Betty Johnson, and Carol Schmidt from the board of directors for gross negligence, breach of fiduciary duty, and malfeasance, Mr. Sanchez seconded the motion immediately. "All in favor," he shouted. A forest of hands shot up. It was nearly unanimous. The revolution was successful. Karen stared at the sea of hands, her face crumbling in disbelief. Her power, built on a foundation of paper and fear, had been demolished in a 20-minute slideshow. The immediate aftermath of the vote was pure pandemonium. Karen, her face a grotesque mask of disbelief and fury, slammed her gavel down one last time, a pathetic crack of wood that was swallowed by the roar of the crowd. "This meeting is illegal! This vote is not binding!" she shrieked, but no one was listening. Her authority had evaporated, exposed as the hollow construct it always was. She, Betty, and Carol, seeing the tide had irrevocably turned against them, gathered their papers and practically fled the clubhouse, pursued by the jeers and angry shouts of the homeowners they had lorded over for years. It was a rout. In the vacuum they left, a sense of euphoria and purpose filled the room. Dave, standing on a chair, called for order. "We need an interim board," he yelled. "We need to secure the HOA's records and bank accounts immediately." Nominations were shouted from the floor. I was nominated, but I politely declined. "My work here is done," I said to those around me. I was the wrecking ball. You all need to be the builders. I did, however, accept a position on a temporary oversight committee to ensure a smooth transition and, more importantly, to guide the new board in conducting a full, transparent audit. Dave was elected interim president, with Mr. Sanchez as vice president and a visibly relieved Mrs. Gable, of all people, as secretary. Her first official act, she declared with a twinkle in her eye, would be to draft a new bylaw protecting garden gnomes. The next day, the real fallout began. The HOA's lawyer, realizing his client was now a toxic asset, formally resigned as counsel. The HOA's bank, notified by the new interim board armed with the minutes from the emergency meeting, froze the accounts pending a signature change. Karen, Betty, and Carol were completely locked out. The symbolic final confrontation happened 2 days later. I was in my front yard, admiring my fence in the morning sun, when a battered pickup truck I didn't recognize pulled up to Karen's house. Two grim-faced men got out carrying crowbars and a sledgehammer. A few minutes later, the sickening crunch of splintering wood echoed down the street. They were starting the demolition of her illegal sunroom. Karen came storming out of her front door, her face puffy and her hair a mess. She saw the demolition crew, then her eyes found me, standing on my lawn 3 houses down. She marched toward me, her gait unsteady, her entire being radiating a desperate, impotent fury. This wasn't the confident, imperious queen of the cul-de-sac. This was a deposed tyrant, lost and bewildered in the ruins of her kingdom. "You," she spat, her voice raspy. She stopped at the edge of my property, on the public sidewalk, as if an invisible barrier now stood where my property line began. "You did this! You destroyed everything!" I didn't say a word. I just stood there, my arms crossed, letting her tirade wash over me. I had already won. There was nothing left to say. I was trying to protect this community. I was upholding the standards. This was a beautiful place before you came, she raged, gesturing wildly at the neighborhood. You just couldn't stand being told what to do. Finally, I spoke. My voice was quiet, devoid of anger or triumph. It was the voice of a man stating a simple fact. "No, Karen," I said. "You weren't upholding the standards. You were the one violating them. You bullied an old woman over her garden gnomes. You harassed a family over the color of their house. You fined a veteran for flying his country's flag. You broke state law and you built an illegal, unsafe addition on your own house that put your family and your neighbors at risk." I took a step closer, stopping at the edge of my lawn. I looked her directly in the eye. "You didn't care about the rules. You only cared about your power. You demanded I tear down my fence, a fence that was perfectly legal, and you threatened to bill me for the privilege of compliance." I let my own words hang in the air for a moment, the same words she had thrown at me what felt like a lifetime ago. "Well, the county has ordered you to tear down your illegal sunroom, and you'll be billed for every cent of the demolition. How does that privilege feel?" Her face crumpled. The last bit of fight went out of her, replaced by a wave of utter defeat. She had no response. My words, her own words turned back on her, were the final killing blow. She just stared at me, her mouth agape, and then turned and shuffled back to her house, the sounds of destruction from her own backyard serving as a bitter soundtrack to her retreat. I never spoke to her again. The audit of the HOA financials, as I suspected, revealed years of mismanagement. No outright theft, but a pattern of using HOA funds for Karen's personal vendettas, like the exorbitant legal fees for frivolous violation notices. The Attorney General's investigation ended with a formal reprimand and a fine for the old board's failure to comply with transparency laws, a debt Karen, Betty, and Carol were held personally liable for. Within 6 months, a for sale sign appeared on Karen's lawn. The house, now with a brand new, legally permitted and very expensive deck where the sunroom used to be, sold quickly. I heard she moved to an apartment complex across town, one with no HOA. The community began to heal. The new board, led by Dave, rewrote the most ambiguous and punitive rules. A new sense of fairness and collaboration took root. People started talking to each other again, not in hushed whispers, but as neighbors. Mrs. Gable's gnomes returned to their rightful place in her garden, a small, colorful symbol of the neighborhood's liberation. My fence still stands, of course. It's weathered to a handsome silver gray, strong and secure. Chloe and Gunnar spend hours in the backyard playing without a care in the world. Sometimes I'll stand on my porch looking at that fence, and I don't just see wood and nails. I see a line in the sand. I see a battle that was fought and won, not with anger, but with precision, patience, and the unwavering belief that the rules should apply to everyone, especially those who scream the loudest about enforcing them. Justice, I've learned, is a lot like building a good fence. You have to be meticulous, you have to follow the code, and you have to make sure your posts are sunk deep enough to withstand any storm.